Annual celebration. My name is Sarah Deardahl. I'm the Executive Director of the Watershed Council. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm joining you today from our office in Dexter on Kalapuya land. I'm going to go through some housekeeping items before we get started with our presentation for the evening. This webinar is recording. We are live, but it will be available afterwards to those who have registered. You are in the audience, so your video and sound is off. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A button. You should also see a chat button. For questions that you might have, please put those in the Q&A, and Gail will be moderating to let you know when, or to keep track of your questions. Links will be appearing in your chat throughout the webinar this evening. So keep an eye out for your chat links as they come along. With that, without further ado, I'm really excited to share our first presenter of the evening. David Lewis is a member of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, a descendant of the Santiam, Takelma, and Chinook people of Oregon. He has a PhD from the U of O and teaches at OSU. He is a researcher, presenter, and writer of many histories of the tribes of the region, and many essays are collected on his blog site, IndianHistoryResearch.com. David lives in Seattle with his wife, Donna, and his sons. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming David Lewis.
Hi, everybody. I've been asked to do the recognition of the tribes. And so this valley, the Willamette Valley, is the original homelands of the Kalapuya tribes. In your neck of the woods, it would be the Santiam, the Winfrey, and other smaller bands of the Kalapuya tribes. And we just wanted to recognize that these people lived here for 10,000 years, in many ways still live here, such as myself, and that we knew a lot about the land around us. We knew a lot about how to fish and hunt here and gather vegetables, and we're still working to help others understand how we lived, our culture, and to teach that to the next generations. So thank you for inviting me to this event. Sarah, did you want me to just go into my presentation, or?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. All right, just want to be clear about that. All right, so I'll share my screen. I have this presentation all keyed up for you. This is something I developed over many years of studying the tribes. And I also have in my house today a cat that wants my attention. So if I should look away for a second, it's probably because of that cat. Some of the realities of what we're at today. So, so I'm a little more about me. I'm a descendant of various tribes in Oregon: the Santiam, the Yoncalla, Chinook, Takelma, and Molalla tribes. I am also faculty at OSU in both the anthropology and ethnic studies departments. I've been working there for a couple of years. I actually live in Salem and have lived here for something like 30, 35, 40 years now. I can't remember how long. It's been a long time. So I'm living literally on the traditional lands of my people, the Santiams. Here's a graphic of shows where the Kalapuyas lived all throughout the valley, from north as far as the outskirts of Portland, down past the Kalapuya Mountains, down into the Umpqua Basin, and there were Yoncalla people down there. And so the people for the Middle Fork would pretty much be those folks, those Kalapuyans that lived on the east side of the Willamette, which would be the Santiam, Sankupi, Some people call the Mohawk here, but actually they're called Paiute, Chifan, and Winfrey, and even Yoncalla, who also had a piece of the Willamette Valley. There are these sort of traditional names we know them by nowadays. These are the names that appear in many of the ethnographic reports that I look at all the time. I was asked to sort of leave a piece of this in here. I have other presentations on Missoula floods. So one of the reasons why we have such a great valley for growing things, it's one of the best growing regions of the world, is because of the Missoula floods. And some 15,000 to 11,000 years ago, there were a series of floods, maybe hundreds of floods that came through the area. And the floodwaters basically took the topsoils from eastern Washington and deposited them in the Willamette Valley. And so that's why we have really good soils here, because we stole all the soil from Washington. And so that was called Lake Allison. And so I believe that, you know, that was absolutely a climate change event that was happening over several thousands of years. And the culture of the tribes before was very different from the culture of the tribes afterwards. Many of the buttes in our valleys, the Willamette Valley, were the places that people escaped to get away from the floods. And we have many buttes that are over the 600-foot threshold for where the floodwaters came in. And those buttes would have been refuges for tribal people. And we have stories in Kalapuya texts that name the Red Hills, Salem Hills as a refuge, as well as Mary's Peak. But clearly all the other buttes would have been candidates for refuge as well. Here's the only image we have of a full size Kalapuya Man, or full length Kalapuya Man. I did some coloring one day on that, just as a little project. So here's what it may have looked like. He may have looked like. He was probably very dark skinned. He had hide as clothing. He had a basket hat. He had a sealskin quiver, and so this is probably close to what he may have looked like. But this is the only image we have of the Kalapuya Man in existence, actually. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is the traditional ecological knowledge of the tribes, and much of that comes through a calendar. This calendar came from the Tualatin people, the most northern of the Kalapuya tribes. In 1877, it was copied down by Albert Gatchett, who was an ethnologist. And all through these different months, and they had 12 months at that point, you look at the cycles, and I know it's difficult to read on your screen, but the cycles will show you basically they were following the growth pattern of both the camas and Wapato plants. There's only one mention of actually hunting on this calendar. So it seems to me, from reading this over, that they were more concerned with the plant cycles than they were the animal cycles, which is kind of an understanding we have now of the tribes. Here is camas. You probably have seen it. I know all of you are probably well aware of camas. But camas is a pretty amazing plant that grows in basically untilled fields that have been there for some time. Usually a little more moist soils, and the bulbs are very nutritious, and they have a lot of protein in them, so they have to be prepared correctly to release the proteins. But Kalapuyans would dig these and prepare them in thousands each season, and so they would do this every year for maybe hundreds of thousands of years in the same locations. So we know this was absolutely what they did and what their major crop was. Lake Labiche, outside of Salem, was actually noted to be a place where you go get camas. So the areas around Lake Labiche, swampy areas, as well as Salem itself, which was known as Chemeketa before it was called Salem, was a known camas place that lots of different tribes would go to get camas. Labiche was drained in the early 20th century, but this is a map, a GLO map of what it actually originally looked like. It was pretty extensive, a very long lake outside of Salem. The other major crop that I mentioned was Wapato. Wapato, also called Indian potatoes, were a pretty major crop for the Kalapuyans. They harvest them by the canoe load, really, and would prepare them and then sell them upriver or trade them upriver for other things. When the settlers got here, they began using them as potatoes, as a replacement for potatoes before they were able to grow potatoes. And root crops are pretty big in the area, so the other big crop is yampa. The word champui is thought to come from the word yampa in Kalapuyan. So that is usually the case. A lot of the Kalapuya words, like place names, were related to the crops or to the resources of the area for the tribes. Here's a pretty busy sort of seasonal round calendar that I created recently. It has images or imagery of the various things that the tribes would gather, hunt, or fish. And each of these little locations would be sort of a camp. And so we have hunting camps and fishing camps and root gathering camps. And people would travel from their winter village, which would be their permanent house, out to these campsites to gather or hunt or fish. And then they would prepare these things in the field and then bring them back to the main village for storage for the winter. And so they would have the winter storage, just like you would have preserves and canned foods nowadays. They would do this exact same thing back then in a different way. And so anything extra, they would have gone to trading areas and trade for other stuff like salmon or smoked salmon, dried salmon, or other products that people were making. So this was a annual cycle. This is like their calendar, and much of it was really based on plant harvesting. Oak Savannes were a pretty big area, region for the Willamette Valley. Oak Savannes are pretty well known from Washington State all the way down into California. More well known in California because the tribes really depended on acorns for food, for proteins down there. The Oak Savanne in the Willamette Valley is not so much different, perhaps a little wetter here, but absolutely was created by Native people setting fire to the valley and basically choosing in that manner which trees would survive, which trees would be suppressed by fire. And so also that would sort of help root crops too. Any root crops underground would have survived, whereas above ground resources would have more likely have burned up. And so that's why root crops are such a big deal for tribes. Huckleberries, berry camps were pretty big. People go into the mountains and the hills and they would gather berries at the right time of the year, usually midsummer, and then bring them out of the mountains to either sort of mix them with other foods, dry them up for preserves, or eat them on the spot. And so huckleberries and other berries like salmon berries are a pretty big deal in the area. Here's a kind of a graphic of Wapato. Wapato has this arrow-shaped leaf. There are many varieties around the world. Lots of different peoples use various species of the Wapato plant, what we call Wapato here. I think it's called arrowroot other places. And so when other peoples did come here, they realized it was basically the same food as they eat in other places. Like the Chinese were pretty well known for going out and gathering Wapato here and replacing that with the Wapato plant they had back where they were from. So it was pretty common. So it is a major resource. It can be used today. It is a food source that is pretty easy to gather. Lake Wapato, outside of Gaston, Oregon, which is pretty close to sort of Hillsboro, was a pretty major Wapato place, and it was called Lake Wapato for a reason. There was full of Wapato, and there were between 10 and 20 Kalapuya villages in the vicinity around it. I had to recreate we don't have a picture of it, so I had to recreate the image from GLO maps, and it took 3 different maps just to show the lake. So it was a fairly large lake. So right here. So that lake was drained, has been drained for a while, and the land turned into sort of agricultural lands. But there's so much water in that valley out there that people are now selling their property because they spend so much money on managing water, and they're selling it to the government to sort of recreate the lake, and that's what they're doing. They're making a new lake out there. They're recreating Wapato Lake, kind of as a waterfowl flyover landing spot, but we are hoping they also put Wapato back in the lake. Acorns were pretty big. I mean, hazelnuts, or what we call filbert sometimes here in Oregon, were a pretty major crop in basically the fall and into the winter. Clearly, the nuts themselves are nutritious. These pictures are actually Europeans. I don't really have a picture of the native filberts, hazelnuts. But the plants themselves can grow really good branches. After you burn them or cut them one year, the next year they grow really straight branches that can be harvested for making baskets. So they're really one of the favored basketry materials for tribes. So much of what we know is, what we think about is Kalapuyan sort of harvesting could be called horticulture, or even sort of agriculture for some people. And it was really kind of mainly maintained through the stewardship of setting fire to the landscape. And there was so much, we had really good soils, really good sun, lots of rain, so plants grow like crazy here. They still do. And the fastest, most efficient way to manage all that is to sort of burn it all down. So that's what tribes would do. At the end of the summer, once the rainy season come, they would burn down the fields, the prairies, and that would prepare the soils and prepare the plants for the next season. We would also, get rid of a lot of fuels that they need to build up, and that likely was the cause of eliminating massive, catastrophic forest fires. Here's some of the tools people use, sort of gathering wild grains from their fires. The fires would actually roast the wild grains in the fields, and so they would gather them in these baskets that were on tump lines over their heads, and they would grind up the grains, and they use kind of like a flour, or put them in their soups and stews, or make flatbread, things like that. Here's a depiction of what the Kalapuya houses may have looked like. They were plank house style houses. The Kalapuyans tended to go more into the ground, so they used bark roofs and planks for the sides, and then they had soil on either side, so it made it very sort of cool in the summer and warm in the winter. So that's kind of a winter house design. And then the summer house design would be something like these. Some sort of brush house where they would bend over branches, and they would put leaves or branches over the top of that, and to create a temporary shelter for a few weeks in various campsites. Or it could have been like this other drawing, or this other picture of a Molalla campsite where they would use tule or cattail mats to make a house. They would wrap that around saplings to make a house. So that could have easily been the exact same thing you see for the Molallas in the valley. They would use that in the valley here. Catching fish was a pretty big deal. Kalapuyans are pretty smart. They didn't wait with a single hook and line to get a fish. They would actually trap them in traps, and we do know about a fish trap that was made on the Row River. We have records of that. And so every day, those people would go down to that trap and clear out the trap of fish. And so you didn't spend a lot of time fishing. You basically outsmarted the fish. And that's one way they did it. Sorry if I'm a little fast here. I have limited time. Tule mats were made out of tules and cattails sometimes. And they were kind of a general purpose item around the household. You can actually subdivide your house with that, sleep on it. You could prepare foods on it. So lots of different things were used. The mats were used for lots of different things, and they were traded. They were a pretty big trade item in the area. So when the Americans came, the settlers, they changed the environment in two ways. First, they removed the native population, which removed the cultural influence on the environment. No longer, they suppressed fire setting to the plains. They suppressed their ways of gathering vegetables, and the Americans put a lot of land into agriculture and a lot of land into stock raising, and so that also changed the way the land was being used. So there was a double kind of effect to that cultural change. Settlers wouldn't allow Indians on their land, and while they did allow them to sort of help them build their farms, they wouldn't allow them to come later on and ask for like handouts when they were sort of starving because the food was gone from being plowed up. So tribes began not being able to harvest enough food for winter stores, and began starving. And so they would actually go. There are records of them going to, settlers' houses and asking for food, asking for handouts. The settlers would deny that because they did not like sharing with savages they called them, and so that was a pretty big deal at the time, causing a lot of settlers wanted to get rid of the tribes because they were considered a nuisance. So game became scarcer because the settlers are good at hunting with their guns now. Fishing became more scarce because a lot of the fish was being taken by things like fish wheels and being canned and sent to the East Coast. And then a lot of folks began doing logging and started changing the sort of whole outlook of the land to monocropping, to changing the river directions, to getting rid of lakes and ponds and swamps, and just changing everything. And so this completely changed the whole look of the valley in just a few generations. So I think that within a generation or so, we started to see the effects of people not burning land. We started to see catastrophic fires happening. And the first big one that's noted in Oregon is the Tillamook burn. And it went on for, I guess it was not just one burn, there were several burns, went on for something like 30 or 40 years. But that, I think, is a net effect of forest fuels building up, nobody burning them down, trying to sort of, with this idea that you're going to save the timber for harvesting later on. The problem is that there's so much forest that it burns down pretty fast, and there's so much forest that there's no way to sort of manage it all. So eventually a fire is set, and then there's so much fuel that it just burns it all down. So that is the kind of an effect of no longer sort of allowing the tribes to manage it in their traditional way. So Native people developed their traditional technologies over thousands of years, hundreds if not thousands of years in their areas. So they have a lot of knowledge of when plants would erupt, when they're ready to be harvested, when animals went from place to place, when fish were ready. It was a very sort of healthy living existence. People had to expend a lot of labor to get these things sometimes. And so, this is knowledge that was suppressed by the Americans, thinking that, clearly Western civilization has a much more advanced culture, so there's no possible way the tribes could actually teach them anything. And this was really the way of thought at the time. But into the 20th century, a lot of native knowledge was being used by some Americans, and sort of in ecological and sort of environmental groups were using native knowledge, but they were not including native peoples. So it became situations of a theft of knowledge, cultural appropriation, we now call it, where it appeared that a lot of people just wanted, that knowledge of how to do something, didn't really care much about the people, so left them basically in poverty, without really any kind of credit given to Native people for what they had already accomplished for thousands of years. But our TEK was developed over many, many generations of Native people sort of figuring out how to live with their land, not destroy it. And they learned how to create a stable existence here for a very long time. And so that's kind of what we're doing here, is trying to figure out how to access that native knowledge to help serve our environment, because we all live here, Native people and non-Native people. And how do we react or access that knowledge in an appropriate way. For one example, there are many sort of environmental restoration projects happening, like Oak Savannes projects that are restoring, but I've been asking Oak Savannes restorers these days, what do you do with your Oak Savannes once you have it built? So you've restored the savanna. So the original reason why Native people had an Oak Savannes, because they created this whole environment by setting fires and managing it the way they did, is to produce food. So does anybody use the food? Does anybody use the acorns? So what are you actually making? What are you doing with this property besides make it a nice picturesque landscape? So what I'm suggesting is that maybe we need to be rethinking how we do these things so that it becomes a human cultural space as well, like it was before. There never was a pristine landscape where nobody was there. It was always human affected through Native culture. And just to end it right away, because I think we're at the end, is the Kalapuyan people eventually went to Grand Ronde Reservation. Many of them sort of joined other Americans in many pursuits, being farmers, being harvesters, being laborers, being timbermen. And so we are still here. We've been here ever since. And the tribes are now restored and working towards restoring our cultural influence over this place. And so that's what we're doing. And I think we have a longer presentation about these matters next time, a few weeks from now, but I'll leave it at that. I believe this is the last slide. Thank you.
Great, David, thank you so much. That was awesome. If people have questions, feel free to type them in the question box down at the bottom of your screen. And we'll kind of keep this open here for a minute, see if anyone has questions. And if not, as David mentioned, we are going to be having a second presentation with David going into these topics a little bit more in depth on October 20th. So if we don't have any questions pop up here, I'm just checking our chat box. Doesn't look like we have any yet, but feel free to kind of think on those questions and you can bring them to that presentation as well. So we'll just give, anybody has any dying questions, let me type those in now. All right, and if not, thank you so much, David, and we'll hand it off to Sarah.
All right, thank you. I think I'll let you have your meeting now, and I'm going to go have a meal.
Thanks so much, David.
Thank you.
Great. Well, that presentation, and I think the last piece there, that David made a sort of a plea to us to include Native people. And I think that that's something that we at the Watershed Council are really interested in furthering in our work and thinking about how we do this work. With that, you can expect to have other opportunities to learn more about Native peoples and Indigenous peoples and hear more about those with our work as well. I want to spend some time sharing what we've been up to over the last year. 2020 has been an incredible year and full of all sorts of challenges for many of our communities. And I just want to spend a few minutes talking about the watershed, our community. Many of us are going into the watershed and into nature and the outdoors for our physical health, our mental health, our spiritual health, in dealing with much of the what 2020 has brought, and much of the trauma that we have here. With that, I want to spend a minute and tell you a little bit about what we've been up to here in the watershed. So many of you may be aware already that in 2019 we completed the Coal Creek floodplain restoration project, and these photos are from this last summer when we did a little monitoring trip up there to check things out. Happy to report that that it's looking good. The photo on the left, you can see the regraded floodplain surface. That's where the creek was essentially filled and the floodplain surfaces were brought down, and a lot of wood was added to spread that water out. The photo on the right, you can see where a floodplain forest was just add water scenario. So you can see the ferns in there and things, and it's just looking really good. So happy to report that. Part of the floodplain, the Coal Creek floodplain project, we had to reroute the Middle Fork Willamette Trail, or at least a section of it, a small section of it. The line, the yellow line in the image on the bottom left of your screen is the original trail that actually went through the Coal Creek project. The little red dot is the bridge, the old bridge site that crossed over Coal Creek. The blue line is the new trail route, and that trail was completed this summer, and it took 2 years of community members, volunteers, school groups, mountain bike groups, and some really, really dedicated contractors, dirt mechanics, to actually complete that really technical and tough section of trail. So we've been able to add over 2 miles of trail to the Middle Fork Trail, and it's open, it's ready for your use. Bring your boots, bring your bike, bring your horse, go check it out. Let us know what you think. It offers some great views and a little change in scenery and topography from the rest of the Middle Fork Trail. So do check it out. We have sort of wound down the technical side of the Elijah Bristow floodplain data gathering, reconnaissance, technical aspect of the floodplain work there, and have some draft preliminary designs that we're really excited to now take to stakeholders. So this fall, we'll be embarking on a significant stakeholder engagement project. We'll be engaging with tribes, agencies, landowners, neighboring landowners, user groups, people who recreate in the park, just all sorts of folks. And we're going to do that really intentional and thoughtful over the next 2 years to really co-create together a floodplain restoration project or suite of projects at Elijah Bristow State Park that will benefit both the people and the habitats within the park and surrounding the park. And just as a quick reminder, there's so many benefits to floodplain restoration, very specifically to the aquatic species, which you can see all of those on the left-hand side, and then also human species and communities, both adjacent and downstream communities that really benefit from floodplain restoration work. Last year, we were able to offer, last fall, actually right at this time, we were able to offer outdoor school, which we've been doing every year now, an outdoor school to 200 sixth graders. They spent 3 solid days in the watershed doing art projects, doing service learning projects, learning wayfinding, all sorts of, basically a marathon of activities over 3 days. And we love getting kids out to the outdoors and the outdoor classroom. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that this year because of COVID, but we hope to find some modified versions for the future because it's so important for kids to be able to connect to the watershed and to the outdoors. So that was a really fun project that we did last fall. We also just love connecting the community to the watershed. These are some pre-COVID community events that we did. Everything from mushroom forays to connecting young people to the habitat projects that we're doing, to ask them to help us do some interpretation of that, help us communicate these things to the rest of the public. And then also just working with youth and other restoration practitioners to develop management plans along our greenways here in the Middle Fork. So we are still trying to modify events to make them COVID safe. We'll continue to do that into the future. Small group sizes, social distancing, but we really understand the need of connecting to community and to the watershed. So we're looking forward to finding unique and innovative ways to be able to do that moving forward. Some bittersweet news this year was that we said goodbye to two very lovely staff members. Sending our very best wishes to Audrey Squires, our Restoration Projects Manager, and Molly Shea, our Youth Education Coordinator. Audrey's down on the Umpqua, coordinating restoration down there, and Molly's up on the Olympic Peninsula, working for the Port Townsend Marine Science Center. So we wish the very best to those ladies in their future endeavors. And with those staff transitions, we've got new staff members to welcome tonight. So please join me in welcoming Cora Boardley and Ka-Voka Jackson to the team. Cora, you're on mute.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cora Boardley. I am the new Youth Education Coordinator. I come from University of Oregon with a background in geography. My biggest passions are diversity, equity, and inclusion in the environment and making sure everyone gets to experience the places and environments that make me so happy, with a special focus on disability accessibility within the environment and within outdoor recreation. So I look forward to working with all of you and getting to know the whole Watershed community.
Hi, my name is Ka-Voka Jackson, and I'll be starting as the new Restoration Project Manager for the Middle Fork Willamette Watershed Council. I currently live in Las Vegas, Nevada, though I'm originally from northern Arizona from the Wapato tribe. I'm super excited to move to Eugene and meet everyone and get started on some restoration projects. Some of my hobbies are mountain biking, climbing, camping, backpacking, hiking, generally anything outdoors. So I'm super excited to start and can't wait to meet everybody.
Awesome. Well, we're so excited to have these ladies join our team. And let me reshare my screen. Great. So let's see, I'll make it large. Okay. So every year we love to honor our partners of the year. And these are individuals who just bring so much to our work and to the watershed, and are just integral in making things happen with us and for us. And this year we want to honor Chrissy, Emma Garner, Jeremy Romer, and Jeff Ziller. All from ODFW, all awesome rock stars in their own right. And we just really want to thank these folks for all that they bring to us and into the watershed. And I'm happy to show that we have them these very lovely ball caps as their partnership awards, newly stitched with our logo. I think they turned out awesome. And if anybody else is interested in a ball cap, those are actually up for sale on our website. So anyway, congratulations to Chris, Emma, Jeremy, and Jeff. Thank you all so much for what you do for us and for this community. With that, I'm going to turn this presentation over to our board president, Jeff Malik.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you again, Sarah, for your entire work over the year, of your hard work, your dedication, and as you said, it has certainly been an interesting year. This has been my first year as board president, and I'm honored to serve in that role with the Watershed Council. I'm very much looking forward to, as you said, kind of learning how we do new things and working with new partners and really taking a conscious way to think about the work that we're doing. And I think I speak for most people when I say I'm looking forward to 2021 and the new things that will come then. I also wanted to thank all of our community members who have tuned in tonight, our friends and neighbors in the watershed. We couldn't do the work of the Watershed Council without all of your support, your volunteer hours, and of course, your financial contributions. So I wanted to remind everyone of a couple opportunities we have in that regard. If you go on our website, middleforkwillamette.org, and Gail will post a link in the chat here. We are having an online raffle this year rather than having an in-person raffle at our annual celebration. So you can purchase raffle tickets for those various items, which you'll see on our website. And the drawing will be done at 5 o'clock tomorrow on Friday the 9th. So you've got one more day to get your raffle tickets for those items, as well as we're having an activity-based raffle. So if you've been participating in the various volunteer events or online activities or educational content that we've put together this week for our annual celebration, you can earn raffle tickets that way. And the drawing for the activity-based raffle will be on Monday, the 12th at 5 p.m. So you've got this weekend as well to get out into the Watershed Council and help out with some of those tasks. As usual, you can also just make a donation to our organization. And at this time, I also want to, encourage us to think about our neighbors to the north with the terrible tragedy of the fires that occurred up on the Mackenzie River. It was interesting to hear David's take on the potential causes of such catastrophic fires, but we have to keep in mind, our neighbors who are hurting right now. So I'd encourage you to not only donate your time and your efforts to the Watershed Council, but also to the United Way of Lane County for their wildfire relief efforts. In terms of upcoming events for us here on the Watershed Council, this weekend, the 10th, there is the Great Willamette Cleanup, which there are actually dates throughout October and locations throughout the valley for various cleanups, but we here are helping to host sections of the cleanup in Oak Ridge and Westford this Saturday the 10th. And then later in the month will be David Lewis's Full Talk. So if you're interested in the concepts he was beginning to talk about tonight, you can join us on October 20th for his more in-depth lecture. And then finally, later in November, this year's Wild and Scenic Film Festival, which as usual is going to feature, a wide variety of environmental and outdoor recreation and other fascinating short films. Proceeds from the film festival this year are also going to benefit Mackenzie River fire relief efforts. So I encourage you guys to all purchase your tickets and attend that. And then I also wanted to thank our donors who contributed many of those raffle items, as well as donations to us throughout the year. But thank you to the Westford Lodge and Mountain Market, Cafe Mam, Trillium Gardens, Yogi Tea, Mountain Rose Herbs, and Ruby McConnell, who is the author of some of the books available in our raffle tickets. So thank you all to the donors for their those donations, as well as thank you all to our individual donors. And with that, thank you all for attending tonight. It's been great to spend a little bit of our evening. Shame we can't do this in person with a band and food and beers on the fire and grilling, but enjoy the rest of your time, and thank you all.